Okay. So the accidental and the essential, a comparison of verbs and nouns in Arabic. Right. So again, we're repeating the concept that we're looking at. What is it? What is the problem that we're facing? We don't know Arabic. So when we read Al Quran, we don't understand what's going on. And if we do understand what's going on, there's a huge gap in our ability to taste and understand properly the nuances of Arabic. So even if we do know Arabic, it's always or often a very, very imperfect and kind of weak understanding. So the accidental and the essential. So we need to talk about some kind of a philosophical concept. In order to understand this, right? So the question is what we call al-mahiyya, the whatness of something, the essence of something, the essential nature of something. So in Arabic, we use the word is, that doesn't exist exactly in Arabic. We use a structure that sounds like is to talk about the essence of something, what something is. So for example, this is a pen. The essence of this thing, the what, you say, what is this? I say it's a pen, the essence of it, right? This is an answer. Okay, it doesn't have to be something physical, but it could be a concept. Gold as a concept, the what of gold is it is a precious metal, right? This is the mahiyya, this is the whatness of gold. So when we say the essence of something, right, we say it is the answer, typo here, the answer to what? So what is this thing? Right, as opposed to how is it or what's it doing? Then we have the howness, right? The howness. So for example, the pen is broken. That is not the essential nature of the pen. That is something that's what we call accidental to the pen. An accident is a state that comes over something. It is not its essential thing. The boy fell sick. Sickness is not essential to the boy, right? But that's something that came over it, over this boy. This giraffe is very tall. So the essential nature of the giraffe is not being very tall. Right? Giraffes are taller, obviously, but tallness is not essential to the giraffe. Here's a giraffe, and this is something that is what we call an accident of the giraffe. Right? It's a term in philosophy that we call in Arabic an arad. And so the accident are things like descriptions, details, things that come over the essence, right? And so actions, for example. So when somebody stands up and sits down, the standing and sitting, that's not essential to them, that's an accident of them, right? And so what's this got to do with Arabic language is because in Arabic, we either going to have a noun sentence or a verb sentence. You're either going to use nouns to talk about what the thing is essentially, or you're going to think about what has happened to it. So I'm always either talking one of these two levels. I'm always talking one of these two levels. What is happening essentially? What is happening accidentally? What is an accident? This is a non-essential thing of this thing that's coming over this thing in this particular time and place, or what is essential to it, right? So for example, if I want to say in Arabic, X is Y, its essence, I'm going to use a noun sentence, right? I'm going to use nouns. Whereas if I want to use verbs, I'm going to say this, what is happening right now to this thing. So X is doing this, something that is non-essential. So X is Y, something that is something is essentially in its very essence. And X is doing Y, what is just happening to it now. And this is particularly relevant because there's many words in Arabic that are, for example, they sound like nouns in English, but actually verbs in Arabic. For example, yaswaddu, it is becoming black. Right? It is becoming black. So you can, or for example, kebira, he is becoming old, right? Or faquha, he became somebody of understanding, right? So these are actions that they don't really sound like actions in English, but they are verbs, i.e., they're talking about something that's accidental and non-essential. Something that is coming over that thing and is not essential to it, right? And to make an example, I'm a Muslim, right? That's something that's essential to me. I am a Muslim. What are you? I am a Muslim. As opposed to Uslimu, I submit. That's not what I am essentially. That's something that I'm doing. That's an accident that comes over me, right? Or Aslamtu, I became Muslim. That's something that came over me, right? So here we can see the difference between ana Muslim and Muslim, they're basically the same thing. Right? Muslim means somebody who does Islam, and the verb of Islam is aslama yuslim. But the difference between I am a Muslim is what you are, as opposed to Uslimu is what I'm doing right now. They're not the same thing. I'm not talking about the same way. Yes, I'm saying Islam is happening, but one is saying Islam is happening essentially, and it's an essential part of me. That's who I am and what I am. The other thing is saying it's something that's happening and coming over me. It's not essential to me. Right? هذا سيء, for example. This is bad. Right? I'm speaking about its essence. It is essentially bad. هذا سيء. Right? This is bad. As opposed to يسوء. It's the same verb, the same thing, to become bad, but it's meaning it's becoming bad. ساء وجهه, his face dropped and it became sad and upset and not good. So that's something that came over it. It's essentially the same root letters, sin, waw, hamza, it's the same thing. But one's a noun, we're talking about the essential thing about this thing, the permanent essential state. And the other thing is about something that's coming over that, even though they kind of have the same meaning, right? Alhamdulillah, or Ahmadullah. Praise is to Allah, and I praise Allah. Basically the same thing, right? Ahmadullah, Alhamdulillah, it's basically the same thing, right? Even in Arabic, you might find some people, they'll say, oh, how's it going, Khalid? And you say, oh, Ahmad Allah, we praise Allah. Ahmad Allah, right? I praise Allah, meaning, praise be to Allah. It's basically the same thing, yeah, but it's not exactly the same thing. Praise is Allah's, is essentially Allah's. As opposed to, I am praising Allah right now. There's something called praise that is coming over me and is being applied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there is a difference, right? A difference between something that's essentially something and that's accidental, right? And so we find countless examples in the Quran where this difference is played out, it's pulled out, right? And this is what today's lesson is about. Okay, so in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the munafiqeen and how the munafiqeen do lip service to Islam. They go and tell the believers, oh, we're Muslims and we're this and we're this and we're this, right? Right? And they say, oh, but in reality they're not. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that when they go to their shayateen, when they go to their leaders, right? They say, inna ma'akum, we're with you, innama nahnu mustahzi'un, we're just having a laugh. Allahu yastahzi'u bihim wa yamudduhum fi tughyanihim ya'mahun. Rather, it is Allah who's laughing at them and extending them into their gross transgressions, completely blinded. So here again is my rough and very liberal translation, right? So they go and they tell their buddies, who are munafiqeen as well, we are actually with you. We are in essence just people having a laugh. This is what we are. This is the very essence of us. Why are you doubting whether or not we're with you? We are mustahzi'un. This is a noun. We are essentially people having a laugh, right? We are essentially, this is who I am, in essence. We are, in essence, people having a laugh. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and Allah, not them, is the one who is, typo here, who having a laugh is occurring from, or here we go, the one whom having a laugh is occurring from. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses a verb and says this action that is coming over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In reality, theologically, that's not really sound, but kind of in a loose sense, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a mustahzi'. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not somebody who has a laugh, but rather this thing is coming over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's an action happening from Him, right? Now we wouldn't obviously describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions as accidents, but that's another discussion, right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Allah and not them. So he puts the word Allah first to say, you guys think you're having a laugh, rather it's Allah and not you. And then Allah uses a verb and not a noun. So they're using nouns because that's who we are. Come on guys, we just joke it, that's who we are. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't describe himself as a joker. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees the one who's quote unquote having a laugh at them, i.e. he's punishing them. He's the one who's doing the action. And this is so Allah uses these differences between a verb and a noun to show that difference. But again, in the translation, we're probably not going to see the difference, really. Right? It's not a big issue. Right? And let them is the one who is letting them wander blindly further astray. Right? So what is the difference there? That it's not them, that's something else. But the point is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compares a verb versus a noun. That's who you are. Yeah, I know you guys are jokers, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's doing that to you right now. It's accidental, and it's meaning it is not essential to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's something that is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Type. Another verse, إِنَّ الْمُصَّدِّقِينَ وَالْمُصَّدِّقَاتِ. Right, this word originally should be مُتَصَدِّقِين. Right, مُتَصَدِّقِين is somebody who gives charity. وَالْمُتَصَدِّقَات, women who give charity. So here, what's happening is the ta and the sad have merged because they have the closeness in makhraj. Right? قَدْ سَأَلَ, قَدْ سَأَلَ. Right? قَدْ صَدَقَ اللَّهُ, قَدْ صَدَقَ اللَّهُ. So the dal or the ta can sometimes merge into the sin and the sad and other letters because they're close. Right? So here these have merged. إِنَّ الْمُصَّدِّقِينَ. But notice the two shaddas, what the sense it gives a sense of difficulty. It's almost like this. Musaddiq. It was hard for me to put it in my top pocket, right? In Surah, similarly, we will see this inshallah at the end of the course. What's the verse? يَشَّقَّقُ.
فيخرج منه الماء
just before it.
ثم قست قلوبكم من بعد ذلك فهي كالحجارة أو أشد.
Right, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about these hearts that are like stones, right?
وإن من الحجارة لما يتفجر منه الأنهار.
Right, so some of these rivers, some of these stones are like stones that rivers pour forth from. وَمِنْهَا مَا يَشَّقَّقُ فَيَخْرُجُ مِنْهُ مَاءٌ. So you're seeing this stone here, يَشَّقَّقُ, right? Instead of saying يَتَشَقَّقُ, yeah, it's the same thing, basically. But يَشَّقَّقُ, the sound gives a sense of what's happening, right? So that's the same thing here. صَدَّقَ is difficult, right? It's difficult. So that's kind of a side point there. إِنَّ الْمُصَّدِّقِينَ وَالْمُصَّدِّقَاتِ. So these are nouns. مُصَّدِّقِينَ وَالْمُصَّدِّقَاتِ. وَأَقْرَضُوا اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا. And then suddenly turns to a verb. أَقْرَضُوا, they gave a loan. Right? So it says, simply those men and women who give in charity and have given Allah a goodly loan, Allah, their reward will be doubled, and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala they have a very generous recompense. So verily, those who men, by their nature, where do they get that from? Nouns. It's not saying the people who give, it's not الَّذِينَ تَصَدَّقُوا, it's إِنَّ الْمُصَّدِّقِينَ. Those who people, by their very nature, that's who they are, so men who by their very nature give charity, even though it's difficult. Where did that come from? مُصَّدِّقِينَ, right? And those women, by their nature, who are by nature people who give charity, even though it's difficult, have finalized. So notice you have these two different things. I remember last week we were talking about the present tense and the past tense. One was something happening once it's finalized. So last time is talking about they are by their nature people who do these kind of things. But then it shifts to a verb and have finalized their act of giving up this life for the next. أَقْرَضُ اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا. It's a metaphor, right? You don't give Allah. Allah doesn't need our help, right? Right? Man ansari in Allah, right? So Sayyidina Isa says, who's going to help me with Allah? You're not helping Allah. Allah doesn't need any help, but who's going to help yourselves by helping Allah's cause, right? So has finalized. So why is these the past tense shifted completely? So it should say إِنَّ الْمُصَّدِّقِينَ وَالْمُصَّدِّقَاتِ وَالْمُقْرِضِينَ وَالْمُقْرِضَاتِ. It should be noun. That'll be the normal thing, but suddenly shift, right? It's a very observable, clear shift, right? And the acting of giving up for this life for the next, as if it were a loan. These are those who will receive the double reward, and they will have some great and generous reward, i.e. indefinite, remember? لَهُمْ أَجْرٌ. Okay, right? So again, very kind of rough translation, but I'm trying to pull out these things. Is it by its very nature, or is it something accidental? Is something accidental, is it happening right now, or is it finalized? Right? Noun sentence, verb sentence, present or past. So this is what we're talking about, the variables in the first lesson. We said what is so amazing about the Quran is it just takes variables and plays with it. Right? Just like if I say, well, anybody can what's it called? It's a Rubik's Cube. It's just variables. Yeah, but can you do it in 2 seconds? That's when it comes to mu'jiza. It's like anybody can just move it around, but can you solve it in 2 seconds? That's when it's something amazing. Or can you do it with beautiful shapes or do these different things? It's just variables, right? But the difference between, so again, the series of zeros and ones are just variables. What is the difference between someone who does 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, and somebody who creates a beautiful thing, right? And so it's completely different, right? So here we can see that shift between noun and verb. وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا فَالْمُورِيَاتِ قَدْحًا فَالْمُغِيرَاتِ صُبْحًا. So al-adiyat, this is a noun. It means galloping horses or camels is possible, another explanation, but galloping horses, it's a thing, right? Things that gallop, al-adiyat. Al-muriyat qadha, things that make sparks. This is talking about what? What is this thing? This is the thing that makes sparks. فَالْمُغِيرَاتِ صُبْحًا, what is this thing? This is a thing that attacks at dawn. فَأَثَرْنَ بِهِ نَقْعًا, and then they stirred up the dust. Suddenly we shifted to a verb in the past tense. Right? Clear change of gear there. فَوَسَطْنَ بِهِ جَمَعًا, and suddenly now in the middle of this village, whatever they're attacking, and they're attacking. So it's a clear shift from a noun to a verb. Right? Again, to the past tense. So it says, by the galloping horses that make snorting sounds, right? And so if you've seen race horses, they actually often put little kind of things in their nose, like a kind of tube, because they breathe so fast they actually bleed. Right? Just like nosebleeds. Why do people nosebleed? Because there's a lot of pressure here, and the the lining is quite thin there. So actually, a thoroughbred will do that when it's running 60 miles an hour for whatever. It's the blood is going so fast that actually have a nosebleed, right? So this is this thing. You can see this thing's galloping, right? It's got making a lot of sound. And so adiyat is a very, very powerful verse because it starts off with motion, adiyat, the galloping process. So there's motion, and then there's sound, right? And then there's what? And there's light, sparks. So this thing is before Fajr. This thing is galloping on the rocky surface, and its horseshoes are making sparks on the floor. And then cause sparks to fly from their hooves, hitting the rocky floor, and then they attack at dawn. And then they attacked at dawn. There's a typo here. They attacked at dawn. So it's a bit strange. It says the galloping horses, and then they attacked at dawn, and then they stirred up the dust. Sorry, no, that's wrong. This is correct, right? Because it's also a noun. Sorry. وَالْمُغِيرَاتِ صُبْحًا, and those who they attack at dawn. So this is part of the same thing. And then it suddenly shifts to the past tense, and then they stirred up the dust, and then they attacked the village, arriving right in the middle of it, right? And so there's a clear shift from now, what, to what happened. What is this thing to what happened to this thing? Two different things, right? And so this, to me, it wasn't so clear. And so in the Ruh al-Ma'ani by Imam al-Alusi, he says the wisdom of having verbs after nouns, as stated by Ibn Munayyir, is the impact it has on the listener due to the powerful change in the language that breaks the monotony of nouns being conjoined with verbs. Now that's, to me, is not a fantastic answer, because that's just saying you've changed. It's like saying, why did you change? For example, why did you, suddenly we're going to have breakfast, and then instead we're going to have lunch, and then suddenly you shifted it around. Why did you do that? Okay, monotony. Okay, fine, I know you broke the monotony, but specifically, why did you put breakfast in place of lunch and lunch in place of breakfast? Oh, I just wanted to change. Yeah, but specifically, why did you do that? That sounds random then. So he's just saying that he breaks the monotony. Okay. So basically, what's happening here is this is the kind of answer you would have from the Sahaba. They feel something, they couldn't express what it is, right? They couldn't exactly express what it is. Like, oh, it's so good, but why? Like that was a beautiful thing that happened. Yeah, but what exactly is happening? You can't express it. You can feel it, right? And so, we don't doubt that someone like Imam al-Alusi or Ibn Munayyir would sense this, but it's not a very good explanation. It's not a very sufficient explanation. Ibn al-Ashur, who was is a 20th century scholar, he mentioned a long thing. He says, so two past tense verbs were employed, atharna and wasatna, were employed to achieve what two nouns or adjectives could not. So he's saying that there's a shift because there's something that can be done with the verbs that couldn't be done with the nouns. Notice how I put nouns and adjectives together. So in Arabic, we don't really have adjectives proper. When you say hada kabir, this is big, what you're kind of saying is this is a big thing, right? You're not saying, you don't have to the word shape or insan is kind of understood. Kabir means a big thing or an elderly person. It doesn't just mean big. There aren't really such things as adjectives in Arabic. Right? That's why I kind of put it here. So it's namely, what is that? The shift from the oath to a description of what happened. So here he's saying the name of the hand, right? What happened? So this is extremely difficult to translate. And so you can see my translation is not really there, but it's very difficult. So he's saying basically what's happening with this shift, you are finishing the oath. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by this and this and this and this and this and this. and then it's assumed that they did those things, and then this thing happened, right? So he says, so it's namely a shift from the oath to a description of what happened as a result of the previous description. That is to say, the achievement. Why did I put that in bold? Past tense verb. They've got it, it's done and dusted, right? So it's shifted to the past tense to say they've achieved that, it's done and dusted, of the goal of galloping and causing sparks and attacking. I.e., so he's saying basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I swear by horses that do this, and horses that do this, horses do this. And then you've shifted to them having done that, and then you're shifting to them having done the results of those things, right? So then here's my attempt at translation, and I'll come back to this in a second. It says, by the galloping horses that make snorting sounds, and then cause sparks to fly from their hooves hitting the rocky floor. And then they attack at dawn, that's the oath, and then it shifts, now they have stirred up the dust, and they have attacked the village arriving right in the middle. That's my approximate translation, but it's not really there either. You can see what's kind of hitting, right? And so here's a very, very important question, right? We just step back a little bit and you say, why is it that if you look in 25, 40 tafsirs, only Ibn Ashur in the 20th century, 1,400 years after the Prophet explained it? It's like, were there ulama tafsir before? Is this tafsir a new thing or something? Right? And again, it's just a suggestion. You're just one person. The way knowledge works is somebody says something, then somebody does something else. You know, Einstein didn't just come out of nothing. There was a whole thing happening, and he tidied the end off, right? And so the same thing, you know, Ibn Ashur comes at the end of something, but why is it 1,400 years you took somebody to answer this question? And in fact, why is it the Sahaba never answered these questions? They hardly mentioned anything about Balagha in the Quran. Why is it it's not there? Right? So there's a very important point here, just on our conception of the Islamic tradition, right? So this is Zarkashi, and I believe this is in the Bahr al-Muhit. Zarkashi is a late Shafi'i and Usuli, and this is kind of scholar of many things. Very, very poor man. He didn't have any books. He used to go to the bookshop and just copy things out. From, you know, there was no copyright in those times, so he just go there and just copy key things out. He never had any books because he couldn't afford them. So he said the Islamic sciences of three types. In reality, he's quoting other scholars. He said the Islamic sciences, right, fiqh, aqidah, hadith, tafsir, tajweed, whatever it is, are of three types. Those that matured, nadijat, wa ihtaraq. They matured and got burnt up. What are those sciences? Fiqh and aqidah. The most important question the Sahaba, tabi'een, every single generation has to ask is, what is halal, what is haram, what do I believe as a Muslim? You can't survive without those two things. You can't get by, right? And so interestingly, if you think about this compared to hadith, is it more interesting to me to know the chain of transmission of the hadith, innamal a'malu binniyat, or is it more interesting to me to know, do I have to have an intention or no intention in wudu? Right? And so fiqh is a more important question than hadith, right? And so hadith in reality comes from a problem of the next generation when suddenly none of us live with the Prophet ﷺ. And many people in our time are lying. So suddenly we have to start catching up and like working out where does this come from, where does that come from, and start, you know, checking these things out. But the first question you ask when the Prophet ﷺ dies, 1 second after the Prophet ﷺ dies, is what's halal, what's haram? That's the first question. How on earth do we find out what's halal and haram? So fiqh and aqidah, these are sciences that are done and dusted. You generally speaking, you do not find discussions today that are new. It's not new discussions. They're just applying low-level applications of questions. For example, the Bitcoin. Is that a new discussion? Oh, subhanAllah, if you study Quduri, you couldn't possibly see that. It's like, no. If you look in the Hanif fiqh Shafi'i, the discussion of what is money is very clearly there. It's very clearly there. It's not a new discussion. What is money? The very nature of money. It's already discussed. Could you give as mahar a cow? Could you give as mahar a pig? Could you do this? Could you do that? All these discussions are there. What the nature of money is, it's discussed in, and there's very, very advanced discussions, actually, right? Particularly in Hanafi fiqh, right? Testimony of a Shafi, right? So what was it? SubhanAllah, right? The phrase, you know the phrase we use in America, like, oh god damn it, you use this phrase, right? So they have a phrase, a very, very bad phrase in Arabic, which is yakhrib baytu, which is like, may Allah destroy your household. It's a horrible thing to say, but it's used as praise as well. Like you say, man, how did he do that, right? So really, when you look at Imam Abu Hanifa, it's like, you want to say, God, you want to say that's like, how did he do that? And why is it that Hanafi fiqh is so strong? It's because where does it come from? It comes from a cosmopolitan city. It comes from the place where everything's happening, right? So why is it that, for example, literature comes out of someone like San Ramon, it doesn't come out in the middle of the desert? Because he has conflict, he has problems, he has this, he has that. San Francisco, New York, right? Why is it they say like San Francisco jazz and New York jazz where it's all happening? It's not going to happen in the middle of nowhere because there's nobody there to have issues and talk about things and these kind of things. So where does Hanafi fiqh come from? It comes from the city. So there's all sorts of things happening. So they were the first people to come with theoretical fiqh. That's why they solve things they solve problems that that we've seen now, but they solve things way in advance, right? Way in advance, right? And Imam Ahmad, he was asked, where did you get all these daqa'iq al-fiqh? Where did you get all these subtleties from? It's all the books of Imam Muhammad, right? The student of Imam Muhammad, right? And Imam Shafi said, all of the whole ummah, we are all children of the footsteps of Imam Hanifa, right? So even though different madhabs, everyone's drawing from each other, right? And building from each other. Anyway, so the sciences that are matured and burnt up, right? Aqidah and fiqh, done and dusted, not an issue. Those that matured, they weren't burnt up. So they started going, but they were never like, okay, this is done and dusted. For example, hadith. So what you found is that people got into hadith, dealt with it, and then everyone's like, okay, is it done now? So done, okay, let's move on. It wasn't really done. There's still kind of things to look at, right? But it's basically kind of, so you will find in hadith, be like, oh, is this hadith sahih? And you say, oh, Shaykh Albani says sahih. Say, well, hang a minute, did anybody before Shaykh Albani say it was sahih or hasan or da'if or anything? Say, you're like, nobody even quoted, like nobody went through that hadith. So why? It's just like, didn't really have to? It's like, okay. I mean, yeah, it wouldn't really change hadith, it wouldn't change much, so it's not an issue, but it's like, it wasn't burnt up. It wasn't like every single thing done and dusted to bits. It's there and it's mature. And there's a whole science there with these principles, but it's not burnt up. Right? And those that neither matured nor burnt up. Right? One of those things is balagha. So here we're looking at something, it's like, mashallah, there are certain things that are there. But really what's happening, there's a lot to be discovered. And you particularly see that in tafsir. Tafsir is a science. When you come to the fiqh of tafsir, it's all there. When you come to the aqidah of tafsir, it's all there. When you come to grammar, it's all there. But there's many things that are like, what's really happening here? Many discussions that you could have. I'll give you an example. وَأُمَمٌ مِّمَّن مَعَكَ. You say, Fareed, show me from the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century, the 20th century, anybody giving a proper explanation of why there's so many memes in one row. Right, you're going to find commentaries on Shakespeare that will explain, for example, I remember studying Macbeth and pulling out that Shakespeare, for example, in one little scene, he will break the rhythm and put S's wherever the rhythm is broken to give a hissing sound. It's like, oh, it's there. But you say, this is the book of Allah and you are Muslims. Why is that? Tell me. What does the meme mean psychologically, physiologically? What is it doing? There has to be a reason. Are you saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts that many memes in the wrong reason, there for no reason? So when we look at Surah Al-Adiyat, like, hang on a minute, one person explains it, that's it, right? And so there's a lot of lost literature, but at the same time, there are certain sciences that there's still room to discover. You're not going to come along and say, actually, I've decided that the Quran doesn't exist. That's not scholarship. But there's a lot of discussions that are very useful. Okay, another example, ring composition, right? This is something that what's his name? Zaytuna. His name is Omar Qurashi and his brother. Can't remember his name. There's two brothers at Zaytuna College. One is like the kind of what's his name now? Escapes my name now. Please forgive me if you listen to this recording. Anyway, so he wrote an article on what's called ring composition in Surah Yusuf. Ring composition is the idea that the ideas sometimes go in circles. This doesn't go in a straight line. It's not like this happened and this happened, this happened. Rather, there's circles. And so what happens is you read the Quran, it seems like, okay, where are we going? And it comes back to that same point again and again. So for example, you compare the language and the words that describe Zulaykha and the brothers. There's similar kind of things, right? Right, and so, for example, they talk about, they use the word rawada, which is, she uses it for seduction, they use it for convincing. It's the same thing. It's like, hang on a minute, there's all these little clues that say, by the way, these two characters should be compared. So who's gone through doing linguistic discussion and the character discussion, say the comparing of these things? Nobody. There's so much there. So in tafsir, it's not like something's lost, but there are many very questions apart from what for us to reflect upon. Say what is being said here, what is the implicit message, what's this, what's that. Adiyat as well, what is exactly happening? Is it talking about horses in jihad? Is it talking about people? Is it a good thing, meaning horses in jihad? Or is it a bad thing, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by the fact that people attack each other and kill each other? Is it this? Was that talking about camels on Mina? It's talking about different things. There's a lot of things that are, yeah, the general picture's there. It's not lost, right? The deen is not lost, but there's lots of things we can still learn, right? So, علوم نضجت ما نضجت وما احترقت. They neither were mature, they're getting there, they're neither mature, nor are they burnt out. You got a question?
Yeah, I don't know if I can.
Listen, go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's because I wasn't paying attention well, but I'm kind of confused on why you're saying on the part that those that matured and have not yet burned up, and you bring about idea of how
Yeah, so the point is, what's your name? Murtaza, right? The point of Murtaza is we are explaining there's a very obvious change in the surah. Okay? If you're a Sahabi, if you're a Tabi'i, if anybody else, you'd be like, okay, there's a shift. And you're like, okay, why is it that the question, why has the shift been made? Why is it only answered 1,400 years after the Prophet? You would imagine that the Sahaba would have explanation. You would imagine that the Tabi'in have explanation. You'd imagine that somebody very, very early on would have 20,000 explanations and then they'd answer it. For example, the issue in fiqh. Any issue in fiqh is done and dusted. Does touching your wife break your wudu, does it not? Does it's all there, right? From the time of the Sahaba and Tabi'in, yes, done and dusted, okay, move on. There's nothing more to say. Whereas here, you see there's just one person in the whole tradition of Islam that's explained it, honestly. Out of so many ulama, right? If you took Afghanistan itself, Afghanistan has so many ulama in Afghanistan itself, they should be able to answer this. Where's the answer?
So because of that, I thought that you would say with those that are matured, then burned up. Because in that situation, doesn't it sound like that is more applied on that?
So tafsir is tafsir says it's neither. So tafsir is balagh. Like you say tafsir in general, not really fair to say tafsir in general, but balagh specifically looking at rhetoric and cracking the subtleties of rhetoric is neither mature nor burnt out. It neither reached its pinnacle. There's still more to do. They've gone very, very far.
So you were talking about the hadith as neither has matured nor has it burnt out.
Yeah.
So it's just left open.
Yeah, it's left open. There's lots to do. And so if somebody comes on and says, oh, I want to do more things, come and answer the question. Come with something different. Come up with a new way of looking at fun. I have nothing problems. One of the problems, though, as well, is that unfortunately in our time, there is in the 20th century, there was a shift. So Ibn Ashur is not an example of that, but there's many people in Azhar and things like that, that they shifted the focus completely. And they changed the curriculum, so it's actually very difficult for many scholars today, or students today, to access the last 500 years of academia, because they don't understand it. Like, even a similar kind of thing is like Turkish, like Ottoman Turkish. Suddenly you take a whole country, shift their language into written, instead of written in Arabic, written in Turkish. Suddenly you can't read what was written 100 years ago, or 200 years, or 300 years ago. So no surprise, your whole mentality would change, right? So you often find that today, is that you will show somebody a book. Here's a book, for example, a very advanced book in Balagh, and they don't even understand it. And they're like, oh, it's just philosophical. They just don't understand it. Right? So just like when we say nothing's been done, it means you haven't reached the pinnacle. You haven't reached the pinnacle. But there's a lot of things that have been done, very advanced thoughts that have been done. So anyway, so this is just kind of a side point now.
When you came up with these examples, did you think of it?
Yeah, just pull them out. So some of these are obvious. Everything I'm teaching here is very obvious. These are obvious things. But the issue here is I was trying to pinpoint exactly. These are all kind of like speaking very generally, but he's like, I want you to pinpoint exactly. So how does knowledge work? If somebody comes along and says something, next generation comes along and says something. So you need 20,000 people saying something, and then next generation. So if that happened in fiqh, then it happens in aqidah, but then what about him? Right? Someone's going to explain something, and someone's going to rip it apart and take it apart and do this and do that. But you say, honestly, it's just one person. There was no kind of like, debate. So again, why would that happen? Is does your life depend on it? Does your life, so we all understand the verse in general, but I want to know it in specific. I want to know exactly what's going on. I want to get that exact thing, right? And that's difficult. That's very difficult, right? I'm just giving just kind of general ideas here. But if you say, okay, are you going to publish this translation? Like, oh, I don't know how to do that. I can't publish this. And somebody would come along and say, no, it's too liberal translation, it's too this, it's too that, right? And so, so the general understanding is that. But when you come to it, you will find, particularly in explaining certain hadiths and certain verses of the Quran, you're like, honestly, there's only 2 positions, 3 positions on this issue. That's it. And you think it's a fundamental thing, like what's happening? Why is this happening? And it just seems like there isn't that much said, right? But when it comes to something in fiqh, it's done and dusted. Why? Because this is a science that still much more to discover. Even there's I think only 1 or 2 key tafsirs that focus specifically on the topic of why this surah comes before that surah. Right? Amir Ghazi, Prince Ghazi, is in the royal family in Jordan. He wrote a book. It's called preliminary. Like he just suggests. He just gives a list of surahs. It just suggests key themes of each surah. And he just says, this is something that needs to be researched. We need to and one of my teachers, this is what he does. And he's trying to get a whole team of just like dedicated crack the meta sense of this surah. What is the overall sense of the surah? So then I can put everything into that. And it's not so easy. It's not just an easy thing. Okay. So moving on. ما عندكم ينفد وما عند الله باق. So this is one of the best examples, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so here we have, that which you have is getting used up, verb, right? And that which Allah has is something that remains, baq. Baq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-baqi, the one who remains. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the words say, that which you have is passing away and perishing, and that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has remains. The words mean perishing and passing. The choice of the words that indicate those things also reflect that same thing. The verb, by its very nature, is perishing because it's not a permanent thing. And Allah's uses a noun because its very nature is permanent. So the word itself reflects that. Right? So it's a very good example of that. Everything that you have is running out before your eyes. I was mentioning last week about the istimrar or tajaddud. The present tense verb is for something that's happening now. You can see it. It's like the sun is, falling from, we're minutes away from death. It's just happening. While everything that Allah has is something that is going to remain. Notice the permanence of that. It is in it that what Allah has is something that's going to remain. Therefore, it will remain. Right? I am a Muslim, therefore I submit. Right? In its very essence. So this is something that is happening to what you have, and this is something that in its very essence is a remainer, is a thing that remains. So therefore, it will remain. Right? So it's not only just the message of what you have is perishing, that which Allah has is remaining, but the way it's structured itself shows the same thing. Right? It's a very, very good, classic example of that. أَوَلَمْ يَرَوْا إِلَى الطَّيْرِ فَوْقَهُمْ صَافَّاتٍ وَيَقْبِضُ. Exactly the same thing. We have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, haven't they looked in Surah Al-Mulk? Haven't they looked to the birds in the sky? Safat, now. This is Safat, stretching out their wings. وَيَقْبِضُ, and they are bringing them in. So he uses a noun, then a verb. Right? Right next to each other. Very, very clear. مَا يُمْسِكُهُنَّ إِلَّا الرَّحْمَنِ إِنَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ بَصِيرٌ. Have they not looked to the bird in the sky? Right? Notice the word the bird. This is what the second lesson we did. They're not talking about the generic bird. They're talking about birds. The bird in the sky, meaning you can refer to the generic bird in the sky in a sense, right? It doesn't mean the bird in the sky over there, right? Okay, in the sky above, gliding with their wings most of the time. Where did they get that from? Noun. Essentially, it's this. Accidentally, it's this, right? So stretching out their wings, gliding most of the time, and flapping occasionally. So notice the sense of the sort of air as well. It's saying, how is it possible for something to be still in the sky and that be held there? Right? It's just going like this. How is that possible? Right? So the point isn't this. The point is this. Okay, so the last one uses the noun to give that default state. It's gliding half the time. How is it up there? Right? As opposed to flapping. Right? Nothing holds it in the air save the merciful. Indeed, He is of every single thing fully insightful. Basir. And so this is a very good example, right next to each other. The same word. This slide is being described with a verb and then a noun to show what is temporary and passing, accidental, that's just happening at that moment. What is more permanent, relatively more permanent. Right? And just as a side point, if you look at the world around us, look at this class, this mosque, ourselves, the universe. Is the universe a Swiss watch that runs like clockwork? Meaning we look at the sun and the moon and these things. Is it an amazing thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made and left? Right, He made and He left, and it worked perfectly. Or is it a continual act of creation? It's quite a fundamental distinction if you think about it. Very, very different, right? And this is very significant in Christian theology because they have all these ideas that, for example, God leaving us. This idea that God made the universe, but He just left us. And then He came back to us in the form of Jesus, that kind of abandonment. So how do we look at things? As Muslims, do we look at, we are here, I'm breathing. Is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala programmed breathing in pre-eternity and here I am just breathing? Or is Allah creating my breathing right this second?
Actually, you say it's right now being created.
Which is?
Actually, you say it is right now being created.
Very good, good. So what did the Mu'tazila say? The Mu'tazila, they said basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just let you do your own thing. Hence, you are more responsible. You're doing your own thing. You are creating your own acts. Right? That's why Imam Bukhari, right? He wrote his book, Khalqullah Af'al al-Ibad. He has a book beside Bukhari. One of his essays is showing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is creating our actions. He creates us, holds us in existence, and creates our actions. Allah created that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates me, creates my actions, and puts the two together and calls it me. Right? But there's no necessary tie. Right? And so, we can say, a continual act of creation. So that's very profound when we think about our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is never separate from us at all. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking to us in the annoying sound of the projector, because He's making that sound right now. He's making the light turn red right now. It's not something He preordained and it's pressed go. It's there. He's there in every single moment. So it's a profound point. And so that's so why did I mention it about who is holding the bird there? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not aerodynamics. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put aerodynamics and put the weight of the bird, put the two things together and said be. But aerodynamics does not hold the bird there. Right? That's what we would say. That's what Ibn Sina, or it's not even Mu'tazili, but Ibn Sina, these kind of people, these kind of philosophers would say, which is kind of putting Allah outside of the picture. Science is doing it. And Allah kind of like made science. No. Allah is doing it. There's no, so cause and effect cause is created by Allah, and the effect is created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if Allah wishes, He'll separate the two, and a miracle will happen that the bird will be in there in the sky, and aerodynamically it should fall, but it didn't. Right? For example, that's kind of classic thing of a miracle. Okay, another example. كل من عليها فان. ويبقى. So we have fan, which is a noun, and yabqa, which is a verb. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, everyone upon it is a perishing thing. Now, that's what you are. You're a perishing thing. Therefore, you are perishing. That's your very nature. In your very nature, you're perishing. So again, this is the concept of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala holding us in existence. Every single split second we exist, and we cease to exist. Allah makes us again. We cease to exist. We make it again. We are like that. What's it called? The flip book. You see the bird flying. So it's just you're a series of blips. Blip, 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 and it's so seamless you don't notice it. But every single moment you perish, you're perishing, and you're being brought into existence again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? While the countenance of your cherishing Lord, possessor of glory and generous, is remaining. He's the one who is always continuing. Right? Right. So that's that. Here's an example of now. You are essentially, every single thing other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is essentially dying and perishing. It's perishable in itself. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has wujud. Right? So do we have existence? Someone says, I'm a sharik to Allah. Okay, why are you sharik to Allah for it? I have existence, Allah has existence. Right? No. You don't have existence. Allah has existence. He is qayyum as-samawati wal-ard. He is holding everything else in existence. So you are held in existence, and your existence is only through Allah's existence. You do not have a wujud. Wujud is not yours. Right? It's not yours. right? That's, so that's why some people, kind of romantically speaking, not really academic, they say there's nothing that exists apart from Allah in that sense, right? The other thing then is Allah's face. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when every single thing perishes, and there's just Allah's face, where is His hand going to be? Where is His hand? When Allah's face exists, every single thing, the only thing that remains is Allah's face. So what's going to happen to His hand?
We don't talk about His attributes, which are more physical. Those are just analogies.
Okay, if they're just analogies, yeah, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about His hand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about His foot, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about many things. His two right hands, for example, certain hadiths. So what do we say? Is we say, what is meant by Allah's face here? What is meant by Allah's face here is Him. Right? وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِ لِلَّهِ. I turn my face to Allah, I turn myself to Allah. Right? So when you say Allah's face, it doesn't mean Allah has a face. Nor does it mean Allah has a hand. What does Allah? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best what He means. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, but clearly it doesn't mean His face, because that would mean everything else disappeared, which doesn't make any sense, right? And so what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean, right? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean by His face? Allah knows best, but it's not a physical face. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean by His hand? Allah knows best, but it's not a limb. It's not a part, right? That's what we say, right? This is what we call a tafweed, right? We concern it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah knows best what it means, but it doesn't mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has body parts, right? Which wouldn't make any sense. Okay, so what do we see then? We saw perishing thing. You are in essentially a perishing thing, essentially, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is remaining. أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ أَنزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً فَتُصْبِحْ. So there's two things here. Notice this example from last week as well. Past tense, present tense. Right? I didn't even notice it. So you ask, for example, where'd you get it from? Just pull it anyway. Open every single page of the Quran, you're going to come out everywhere. It's very common. Right? Very common. Some of these things you're going to find in just normal literature. You'll just see in Arabic because that's the language. Right? And this unfortunately is the case. Sometimes people are like, SubhanAllah, look how the Quran is amazing. He uses this word here. That's Arabic. Right? That's not a miracle of the Quran, it's a miracle of Arabic. So you can't use that to show that, sometimes it's a bad proof. It doesn't really indicate anything. Which of these two clocks is right? We should close pretty soon, right? Because we have 2 minutes short. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions how, so He says, have you not seen how Allah has sent down all the way from the sky? Notice, mina sama'i ma'in, flips the order to show all the way down from the sky, abundant water. And then right before your eyes, it's happening right there, the earth has become a permanently green thing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say it becomes green. It doesn't say ikhdarrat al-ard. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say the earth became, it doesn't use a verb. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses a noun, mukhdarra, a thing that has become green. So it's become like, subhanAllah, look how things completely change. And then you deny the fact that you could completely change from being dead to alive. So look, the earth completely changes to become this essentially new thing. Right? So the noun is used for the essential change, right? Naqal naw'i, we say in Arabic. It's in its naw'i, in its very nature, it's now completely changed. So you use that noun to show that permanent change from one being to another. Inni ja'ilun fil ardi, right? You say in normal Arabic, Inni sa'aj'alu fil ardi khalifa. I am going to do that. Sa'aj'alu normally, right? Why does Allah use a noun? Because He's not saying that He's going to establish someone in the earth. He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I am someone who is going to establish on earth a khalifa, a representative or steward. I.e., it's like, for example, saying, can we rely on Imad? Well, his name's Imad. Imad. In his very name, he's somebody you rely on. Right? We say, Farid, you're a bit of an odd character. My name is Farid. That's what it means. So saying by his very nature. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, it is unquestionable whether or not I would do this because I am somebody who's going to do that. That is who I am. Like we say in American, my name isn't Jake if I don't do this. Like that's who I am. I'm talking about my very essence. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَقُولُ آمَنَّا. Verb. They say we have believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They use a verb, something that we have done. But they're not talking about who they are essentially. Right? And then what? And then last sentence, وَمَا هُمْ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ. Right? But they are not believers. Essentially, they are not believers. So Allah usually uses a noun to talk about what they are essentially, uses a verb to talk about what they are accidentally. So it says, believe it or not, there are actually people who say, we believe solidly in Allah. That's the past tense being used. Solidly in Allah. We've done that thing. That thing has come over us. Despite the fact that they are not believer material to begin with. In their very essence, they are not a believer. You don't have that in you. You know, for example, I want to go become a boxer. And the guy says, Farid, with all due respect, you're just not a boxer. Essentially, you're not a boxer. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes these people, they don't have iman in them to begin with. And so it's just lip service, but they're not believer material. Right? Essentially not believers. وَمَا كَانُوا مُهْتَدِينَ, as well, I mentioned this before. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions these people that they have sold misguidance for guidance, and they haven't benefited. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say that they weren't guided. We did this in the first lesson, I think. It doesn't say that they weren't guided. مَا هُدُوا, they weren't guided. Rather, مَا كَانُوا مُهْتَدِينَ, they weren't even in the category, that group of things called guidance receivers. They weren't even eligible to even take on guidance to begin with. It was not even in their being to do that. So we're not talking about what they did, we're talking about who they are. Right? It's like somebody who runs, I said, I ran across the room yesterday. So you don't even have legs. You know, you're paralyzed since birth. You're born without legs. You're not even in that category of a runner. Right? So this is talking about the noun indicating what something is essentially. Right? So, i.e., in Arabic, when we say X is Y, we're talking about what is it essentially versus what is happening, something comes over it, and we see that in the Quran time and time again, where these two things are compared. Subhanallah bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakallah khair.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.